Hello, everybody, and welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast. My name is James Dickson, wishing everybody a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you are tuning into today's podcast from. The podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, Engage, powered by D2I Systems, winner of Best Event Management Platform at the 2017 Event Technology Awards. To learn how Engage can make your business more profitable, visit d2isystems.com/engage. And a very warm welcome to all of our podcast followers today, and two guests today joining us via one link. So we've got a nice condensed screen for you, for those of you watching the video version of the podcast. Joining us today, we welcome Pete Eyre, MD of Meetoo, and Sophie Thomas, Marketing Manager from Meetoo. Guys, thanks very much for joining us today.
Hi there.
Hi there, great to be here.
On today's podcast, we'll be looking at how platforms such as Spotify, Vine, and YouTube have changed audience engagement forever. That sounds like a bit of a bold statement when we say the word forever, particularly, but I think it's fair to say that most people listening to that statement would begin nodding their heads, and if they've even got a vague understanding of how audiences engage and interact at events, they would realise that actually, without delving too deeply into it, that is very much a true statement. Before we look at that, I suppose, in a wider context, let's just introduce people to Meetoo, first of all, Pete. For those of you who haven't come across you guys before, tell us about what it is that you guys do.
Hi there. Well, Meetoo is a real-time polling and Q&A app. It's used throughout higher education and throughout meetings and events, particularly in employee comms. And it's basically the modern incarnation of the audience response system that's obviously been around for probably 25, 30 years now, which started out with the clicker devices, which were handed out to people and they could vote 1, 2, 3 or 4. And of course, we live in a world where everything is done through your phone, and that's exactly what it is now. And by being done through a phone, it takes it to another level. So it allows people to vote, to feedback, to ask questions, and allows them to do that not just in the room, but from anywhere in the world. As long as they're on a device with a browser, they can access those meetings. And our offering is focused on being incredibly simple to use, running through a browser or through PowerPoint, and just being accessible anywhere in the world. So that's kind of what we do in a nutshell.
And when we then, having established that nice and quickly and putting it back into context of what I said at the beginning of how platforms such as Spotify, Vine, YouTube have changed audience engagement, particularly when I look at something like YouTube, content providers and people who have YouTube channels now have this brilliant ability not just to be able to broadcast themselves in really, really good quality to millions and millions of people globally, but also the ability to have very, very quick, sometimes instantaneous feedback about what they're actually delivering from a content point of view. With things like YouTube Live or Facebook Live, now we've got the ways of interacting with people in an unprecedented level where they can put questions and comments straight to you whilst you're broadcasting. And when we look at the question that I posed at the start of today's episode and how that ties in with you guys, is that very much where you see Meetoo fitting in and how it dovetails with stuff that's happening on social media?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think for us, the way that we look at it is that platforms such as YouTube, particularly like you mentioned, there's a sense of instant gratification now. The way that people search for information, ask questions, look for answers. People don't have to pick up a phone anymore. People can just type into Google, how do I do this? Or how do I do that? And instantly they get the feedback they want and a number of different options to choose from. And then likewise, as someone who's broadcasting content, you've also got that option where if you're putting a pitch out there for a piece of content and you just run with it and you go with it and it's all recorded live, you're instantly getting that feedback from people. Do they like it? Do they not like it? Are they using emojis as reactions? Are they just putting thumbs up? All of those sorts of things. It's such an easy way to communicate now. And I think it's hard to believe in some ways that we didn't always have that.
Yeah.
I grew up not having the internet for school and things like that. So now when I speak to family and friends who are younger and they say, oh, you didn't have YouTube. How did you know how to do anything?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we had to find out either through someone who had done it and it took a whole lot longer. Whereas now you're 30 seconds away, if even less than that away from finding an answer. So I think in terms of how Meetoo fits in with that, we talk about instant feedback and live polling because it's in the moment. It happens right there and then, and the reaction is a truthful reaction that you get from the audience, which is hopefully obviously what event organisers and meeting organisers are looking for. They want that real feedback and that engagement.
Yeah, and I suppose whilst we may almost sort of talk, I wouldn't say it's tongue in cheek when we talk about instant gratification, but actually when you translate that into an event environment where you have a presenter or maybe somebody delivering a keynote session, what they want to know is, was it engaging and did it deliver the right message to the audience? And what the organizer wants to know is, did I book the right keynote speaker? Did I book the right session host for that? And I suppose by utilizing a tool like Meetoo and utilizing a way that they can actually monitor and see how many questions were put, what types of questions were put, how many people actually valued those questions and showed some feedback or a thumbs up to it, they can actually analyze whether or not they're putting together the right type of event, can't they?
Absolutely. I think one of the key things we see, and the parallel we see with the apps we just mentioned as well, is the instant realization of value. And so we want instant gratification, but actually we don't have long to engage people. And in the old days of conferencing, you could trap them in a dusty conference room and build up to the key part of the presentation that's interesting and everything else. Whereas nowadays, people have got phones in their hands, they've got their laptops in front of them. The presentation has to be engaging instantly. If people are going to engage and give their feedback, they want to know that that feedback has been collected and will be reacted to instantly. And we see, for example, when people are asked at the start of a session what their understanding is or what their opinions are or what they would like to see responded to, sessions actually take shape during the session now, rather than it being a survey that was done before or waiting until next year to improve it. And I think that's where we sort of related it to, you know, if you take the example of Spotify, you listen to music now and you want that music, you could probably give it 2 or 3 seconds before you skip to the next song. It's got to, a song has got to show you the value it's going to give you straight away to get you to commit to longer. In the old days, songs were written differently. You got a long introduction and build up and everything else, you know, Phil Collins, In the Air Tonight, up to that final bit. In these days, no one would ever get to that bit on Spotify. They'd be like, what's this? I'll move on to the next. And I think that's something that we've taken in the design of our app, is we know that organisers need to show that value straight away, and we need to provide a tool that will allow them to show that value straight away. So super seamless, allow people straight in, and then give the audience that payoff straight away to get them engaged for the rest of the conference.
You've just sent a shiver down my spine thinking that Stairway to Heaven may never have been written in 2018 based on what you've just said. When we look at how the actual interaction is physically displayed, you mentioned at the start of the episode that there's an integration with PowerPoint. How does the actual display of the feedback manifest itself in a live events environment? Yeah,
so there's a couple of ways. I mean, and this is the beauty of these systems now that they are run through a browser and on people's phones, either as an app or an HTML app, the scope of the meetings they can be used in is much broader. So you can even run the meeting without any kind of display, because actually what you've got is the display comes back on people's phones. So in the most basic form, if you ask everyone to vote or feedback on or ask questions, they will see all those responses appear back on their own device. So there's no need for a screen at all. Generally though, they would be shown on a projection screen or on a webinar screen, and that could be either a web page or, as we see a lot of our clients use, run through PowerPoint. The beauty of PowerPoint being not only is it a display mechanism, but it's also a very stress-free way of running the presentation. You've got your voting polling slides in there, and it means your presentation doesn't need to be interrupted. You don't need to have Alt-Tab or use switches or anything like that. You just press through your presentation, and at that point, the animations actually pick up the voting. So an animation picks up opening a vote, allows everyone to respond. The pressing enter again closes the vote and then displays that on the PowerPoint screen and also back on everyone's device as well. So for those who may be more limited view, joining a meeting on site on their phone, they're still going to get that response as well on their screen in front of them. So it's usually a combination of display methods to give people that feedback.
I think as well, because it's a standalone tool, you've got that ability that if you're using software like GoToWebinar or other kinds of streaming or conference systems, it doesn't interfere with that. It just sits nicely alongside that. So flexible for whatever kind of event you are running, you've got an option that you can use. University lecturers are using it with Skype.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely accessibility is one of our key things.
How I sense quick is it? It maybe is the right term to customize, because every session will be completely different. I guess that there are ways to deploy the system in a really simple way, where it could just literally be a thumbs up or a thumbs down if somebody wanted it to be. But if somebody wanted to be more sophisticated, and if people want to ask, specific questions, is that just a case of them typing it in on the app or through the browser that they're accessing? How easily can you customize the system depending on the session?
Yeah, literally, it's just as simple as if you're running a session and you're asking or putting a question to the floor, you've got a choice. You can either set it up as a poll if you want to, or if you just want to ask people, rather than doing show of hands, you can ask people to type things into the Q&A part of the app, and then instantly you can choose to either have those answers appearing up behind the speaker, and again, as Pete said, they all get reflected back on the person's device who's sitting in the audience. It literally takes seconds. Like we sort of half-heartedly joke about it that it takes seconds, but it literally does. It just depends on whatever the organizer wants to do. They can create polls on the fly if they want to, or if they are using a more formal presentation method through PowerPoint, we've got an option in the PowerPoint add-in that we've created, which is literally you can convert a slide of bullet points into a poll with literally the touch of a button. So we've tried to keep it as friction-free as possible.
When we're looking at the timing of sessions, something that's occurred to me whilst we've been having this discussion is that there is, whether people like it or not, I think it would be personally fair to say that there's a very sort of standardized way of formatting conferences, particularly. You have your session time. So let's say it starts at 10 a.m. and the session finishes at 10:40. It will be 30-minute presentation, 10-minute Q&A. Now, with systems like this that are allowing people to flourish and ask questions and put stuff, and create potentially a long list of questions that could be put to a speaker or to a panel, have you seen any instances where organizers are reformatting their timings because they've suddenly realized, actually, it's now not possible to fit in all the questions into that 10-minute slot? We need to actually rethink how we do all our timings.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've seen that right to the point where actually presentation slots have been completely taken out and replaced with panel sessions. Right. I think, look at a lot of conferences, what most people really want to hear is real stories, real anecdotes, and ones that are relevant to them. And so when you've got a panel session, there's nothing more relevant than asking that panel some questions, getting to like those to the top, and sort of democratize the process of what's going to be answered, and then hear those anecdotes. So we see that a lot, but we also do see the more traditional format that you just talked about there just being used more wisely. And if there's 10 minutes for Q&A at the end, we just don't have those sort of awkward silences where no one's got a question, or the awkwardness of lots of people having a question and who on earth do you pick? And it puts the speaker on the spot. So we generally have a speaker that as soon as they go to Q&A, they already have the most popular questions in front of them. The audience aren't feeling frustrated that they're not going to get to ask them because they've asked them at any point during the presentation, but without breaking the flow of it. And actually, when that happens, that's what can push out the Q&A time at the end. So it stops that happening as well. And yeah, often we don't get to answer, or they don't get to answer as many questions as they like, but hopefully they've answered the most relevant. They also have the other ones stored and can make a commitment to answering them at a later date. But one really nice thing we see is that it does also operate as a bit of a back channel, and people are used to sort of two-screen viewing these days, and some people, they need two-screen viewing to be engaged, whether it's watching a TV program, watching Bodyguard last week and watching it on Twitter at the same time as I was. That's exactly how I like watching. That's the attraction of live TV. And I think the attraction of live events sometimes is the audience around you using that back channel. And what we see is some great questions, but also people within the audience coming back with some great comments on those questions, and sometimes doing part of the job or some of the job for the speaker. So it's another dimension, and you're harnessing the intelligence in the room there.
One thing that you sorry, Sophie. One thing you very, very briefly touched on, and I don't know if we can expand on it a bit more. If you have any comments, is the follow-up from any unanswered questions, because you actually preempted what I'd scribbled down here a few moments ago when you touched on it, and that was one thing I was going to ask, because one thing that events strive for now is ongoing content. They're in a constant battle with other events in a very, very crowded marketplace, regardless of what sector they're servicing. And one thing that everybody's agreed on is there has to be ongoing content being fed out there throughout the year for an annual event to still keep in people's minds. And this sort of system here is potentially going to offer a way to generate ongoing content. If you've got a long list of unanswered questions and you've got a presenter who's happy to do so, you've got the ability there to actually answer those questions over a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, definitely. I think it also helps with event partnerships as well, particularly if you've got, you know, either sponsors or exhibitors or co-sponsors or co-located events where you've got the same person organising it, but there's kind of different facets to it. It's then got that option where, particularly with Meetoo as well, with the anonymity options, people can submit these questions and there's no worry of fear of retribution of, oh, this person said this about this. If as event organisers you've got all that information, that it is like a blank slate where you can say, okay, could we make this into an online event that's a webinar that we could host? Could we make it into an email course, for example, if you're wanting to, like, you know, help people understand how they can make events better, maybe create an online e-course that people can sign up to. Literally, once you've got that information that's been crowdsourced, you can do, you know, whatever you like with it. And particularly if you've chosen the anonymity option, you've got no worry of offending anyone or treading on anyone's toes. It's your information that you've gathered as the event organizer. It's then completely up to you what you do with it. And I think what I was kind of going to add to your point previously, where other people at events are answering other people's questions in the Q&A feed, I think going back to the kind of the question that we're asking at the beginning about audience engagement is that people are more engaged in the content they create themselves. If they've had a hand in creating it, then ultimately people do feel more engaged and more inclined to re-engage at an event or with an event organizer where they felt like, oh, brilliant, like I really feel like that was interesting to me and I got to contribute and I feel like my contribution was heard and welcomed. And then if in 2 months' time they happen to see that that event organizer is doing a webinar on the exact topic that they fed into the Q&A board, I mean, that's kind of event gold, really, isn't it?
It is, and certainly from a content point of view, I've been in situations before where I've facilitated conferences and you go to the Q&A and nobody's got a question. But you know full well that if you just get one question from one person, the likelihood is that will trigger questions from other people in that room. And to me, what this is doing, and this sort of service is not so much eliminating that prospect, because if you get a terrible, terrible audience, you still run the risk of potentially, you know, having. But what you are doing is opening up the possibility of other questions from other people by reducing the possibility of having nobody wanting to put their hand up and speak down the microphone. The other sort of angle to that I wanted to ask you is pre-event. I guess there's no reason why a system like yours couldn't be deployed before an event if you've got a synopsis of a particular session, that people couldn't be asking their questions actually before the session's even begun or even before the day of the event itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen this in several ways. I mean, there's a survey feature, so you can send out some self-paced polls in the days or the hours leading up to a meeting to say, you know, what's most important to you and help set the agenda. And that can be really useful for that purpose. I mean, another way we've seen that work really well is if you're holding this for a group of 30 people, with the volume of information coming in is probably very easy to handle in the moment. But we also, we did a town hall for a global business recently, and they invited 100,000 employees to the meeting and to contribute in this way. But clearly that's a lot of questions coming in. Yeah. Great for live polling, but for questions, that's going to be a huge amount. So what they did was they opened the Q&A before the meeting. So they had a chance to kind of filter it, group it, and then feed it back in, allow people to like a more limited set of questions, because a lot of them were on similar themes. So it allowed them to handle it, set the agenda for the meeting, and then they open it for live questions during as well. But it just gave them that management, because I think one of the things that people fear with or might feel with a system like this is, you know, how will I manage it all? And I think that's the point. There's different management features in there. For a small meeting, it kind of manages itself. For maybe a more difficult subject, you might want to put moderation on and have someone there and filtering what's coming in. But actually, for most of the meetings we do, moderation's off, and it really does manage itself, including people actually contributing back to the questions in there.
Just to expand on what you said there about filtering or grouping similar questions, you know, if you do have a large audience and there are a lot of people wanting to all put forward the obvious question and they've all been good enough and interactive enough to go on and type their question in, is it a case of manually grouping stuff together, or is there an algorithm or some sort of filtering process that you can input in order to put certain criteria in so that if a question includes this keyword, it gets grouped into that particular group over there?
It's a great question. I mean, there isn't an algorithm for it yet. That's exactly the kind of conversations we're having. But it depends on the scale. I mean, the liking is the simplest way of doing that. And I think that's the beauty of liking questions to the top is people may have not logged into this app before, but people just know what to do. And I think that's part of the design of this app is we've tried to embrace people's behaviors rather than change their behaviors. People use apps all day, every day. So when they log into our app, they should be able to use similar behaviors to get the result they expect from it. And I think that's where liking really helps. I think that's where managing the sort of survey questions at the start and be able to manually put those into different sort of buckets. And managing it that way.
And just going back to what we were saying earlier about, you gave the example of songs, you know, you've got to capture people within the first couple of seconds, otherwise they're just going to skip to the next one. I guess that's the same when they're now using an app, you know, if they can't figure out how to use something within 5 or 10 seconds, unless it's really intuitive and it's in exactly the same format or style that they're used to using, they're quickly going to get fed up with it and just close it down and not use it.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And that's where we're constantly fine-tuning, working with customers, working with end users, just to see if there's anything we can tweak or if there's anything changed in the way people are interacting with their phones and with their apps that we need to be aware of to make sure that happens. Because for meeting organisers, they want maximum adoption. And I think it's a combination of things, but a really important part of that is just having, you know, a great UI that people just get as soon as they go in there and resisting the temptation to have a million gimmicky features and actually focusing on the core value and the core proposition of the product.
Well, I was just going to say, I was going to say, sorry to talk over you. One of the things that we, from the way that observing how people use their phones in meetings or events, is people do get easily distracted, and you can't stop that. You know, you can't make people physically lock their eyes to the stage and not look at anything else. People are very busy and they very much are very choosy about what they give their time to. One of the things that we talked about here for a long time was adding a minimized poll feature, which is within the app, if live polling is taking place and you answer the poll, or maybe you don't want to answer the poll, you can dismiss the poll so that it's not taking over your phone screen. You can choose to either type a question into the Q&A board, for example, or browse through the other questions or comments that have been made in the Q&A. And that feature it came out of a request, and it was developed over time until we felt it was appropriate to release it. And now we have released it. Wasn't like a major fanfare of a release, but it's a small thing like that that's made such a difference to the way that even in meetings when we use it here, if you've taken part in the poll and you've done your bit and you want to add a comment, that little tiny feature of being able to just minimize that poll massively increases the time span and the engagement that you have with what's in front of you.
It does, yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm conscious of time today, and I've got sort of a list of things that I want to fire at you. And I always say to our guests on the podcast that it's never going to be a Q&A, a Paxman Q&A. But the more I get into this particular topic, I'm finding myself jotting things down. We've mentioned the PowerPoint product, and that there's an integration with PowerPoint, which I think is fair to say, regardless of what other people's particular opinions are, is the most common software platform that's used to deliver presentations, isn't it? It's been a global leader for a long time, but more and more people are using other platforms. Mac users will be familiar with Keynote. There are things like Google Slides that Android users and Google users are using now. Prezi. Have you looked at those other platforms as well? And is there a difficulty in syncing with those, or is there a possibility that could become accessible as well via your own platform?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's several out there now. I mean, PowerPoint by a country mile is still the most used presentation platform, which is why we focused on that. That said, not all of our customers use PowerPoint. We have a web interface which you can embed in other platforms or switch to. So you can run all the features of Meetoo through a web page.
Right.
And as that develops, our latest incarnation of that is called a presentation view, which actually allows you to control everything through the web page without going to your dashboard, all on one slide. And we see that developing to being the solution for any presentation platform. You would be able to embed this in it. The reason we focused on PowerPoint in a different way, and where we've got a native integration, is because it is so widely used. And whilst a web-based solution can work on all these different presentations, having a native integration deep within your desktop PowerPoint that just appears on the ribbon, allows you to convert the bullet points you've got, make sure that your polling slides follow the same theme as everything else you've got in your PowerPoint presentation, and allows you just to email a presentation over with your polling results into someone that doesn't have that integration, is really key to our customers. So that's something we've invested a huge amount of time in, and that's something we constantly get the feedback that the reason we have gone with you guys is because of your PowerPoint integration.
Sure.
So that's why we focus there. So I think we've decided to be the very best in a couple of areas, rather than try and have a product that works in every single platform on that level.
Well, it's again interesting you ask that, because again, preempting something that I've jotted down here is that fundamentally, and I mean this as a compliment, this is a simple concept to understand. What you guys are offering is a very simple concept. It's not overly complicated. There are not 8 or 9 or 10 different vertical strands and sections of the platform that you can pick and choose to use. You know, it does what it does. And even though you said that you're constantly refining it to make the user interface more friendly and find ways of doing that, do you think that fundamentally you're not going to change? You're pretty much in a space now that you're happy with what the product does and how it behaves, and it's just a case of refining? Or is there anything that you would like to really develop and add on to Meetoo?
I think we've got lots of ideas that we'd like to add on to improve the experience and improve the core value of it. So there will be things that are added in. There's lots of exciting stuff in the pipeline, but what we won't do is come up with sort of left field gimmicky stuff, or take our eye off who our real customers are. And I think that's something that we decided to really focus on. And one of the biggest things that we have to talk about, and the reasons that people come to us, is our independent reviews. Mm-hmm. So we're rated 9.5 out of 10 on Trustpilot. We're one of the only apps out there to be asking for that kind of feedback. And it's all down to the fact we're really, really close to our customers. It delivers the value they want. We understand what they need. We constantly work to understand what they need. And there's a lot of improvements can be made just within what we do. So we will have new features. New features are coming all the time. But what we don't want to do, and every time we do a product release webinar, and we have our customers on the line and talking to us through Meetoo, they're kind of excited about something new coming, but saying it's not going to make it complicated, is it? It's not going to overcrowd my dashboard. It's not going to make it harder to train my staff. It's not going to make it harder for my participants to join in. And that's a value that we hold very close to our hearts, and we don't think we have made anything harder. We're just adding value. So yes, the future is full of innovation and excitement, but I think it's within the boundaries of what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. And if people want to find out more, meetoo.com is the guy's website, meetoo.com. For those of you watching the video, Pete will now show us his t-shirt so that you've got that spelling absolutely accurate. Perfect. There we go. That's the money shot. That's what we wanted. If you're listening to the audio version of today's podcast, hop over to eventindustrynews.com. You can watch a video of Pete and Sophie who've joined us and gone through today's podcast. Any other social media handles of ways and means that guys can get hold of you?
Yeah, it's really easy. It's just simply @Meetoo app. So MEETOOAPP, and that's across all platforms. So LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook.
And again, in the background there, for those of you watching the video, you may notice a shiny Event Technology Award, it looks like there. Just remind us what category that was for again?
The categories, oh my goodness.
Best use for audience participation.
Audience participation.
Finalists in 3 categories this year, so very excited about that. Conference technology, audience participation, and one other.
I can't remember. That's awful, isn't it?
So many you don't know what to do with now. So many don't know how to do with. And I suppose a little plug, Event Tech Live and the Event Tech Awards this November, Old Truman Brewery and Troxy respectively. Head over to Event Tech Live and the Event Tech Awards websites to find out more about those particular events. And that brings us nicely and professionally to the end of today's episode. It's almost like we have these things planned. We've been joined today by Pete Eyre, MD, and Sophie Thomas, Marketing Manager from Meetoo. Guys, thanks very much for joining the podcast today and talking to us.
Thank you very much.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for having us.
No problem. The podcast is brought to you by our own sponsor, Engage, powered by D2I Systems, winner of Best Event Management Platform at the 2017 Event Technology Awards. To learn how Engage can make your business more profitable, visit d2isystems.com/engage. Eventindustrynews.com is the place to go to for up-to-date information on all the news, features and content that Event Industry News are putting out. And our own social media feeds. You can follow us at Event News Blog on Twitter, or search for us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and by searching for Event Industry News, I'm sure you will find our feeds. Thanks again to the guys for joining us on today's episode, and we will see you on next week's podcast. Thanks a lot and goodbye.
Thank you very much.